Hello everyone, good evening. Welcome to the Think and Drink. I hope you can hear me. It's a pleasure to see so many faces. Thank you for coming everybody. And of course thank you Raquel Rolnik for being with us tonight. It's a great pleasure to have you here. Today's event, Think and Drink, is a bit different than the Think and Drinks you might know, because tonight as well as next week, Monday, will be a joint venture between the Kosmos Dialogues, funded by Humboldt University, and the Think and Drink, which is organized usually by the Georg Simmel Zentrum for Metropolitan Studies. So, for those of you who have not been here to the Think and Drink so far, I will explain briefly what you can expect, and then I will introduce briefly Raquel before I will hand over the word to her. So the Think and Drink is always taking place on Monday evenings in this room, and the idea is to invite scholars from all over the world, giving us a brief input, a theoretical input on current research or on just recently published books or whatever. Those scholars will usually give a theoretical input of 40 or 45 minutes. Afterwards, there will be a short questions and answers round, and that's the drink part. We will become more informal, and we invite every one of you to stick a little bit longer with us to have some drinks, wine, juice, whatever, some snacks, and to exchange with us in a more informal way. So, because Humboldt University is not giving us funding for the foods and the drinks, we would like to ask you to spare a few coins and put them into the donation box you will find on the table there. Also, for the funding, there is a participation list. You do not have to enter your real name if you have problems with that. Yeah, you just need the name and the signature so that we can prove to Humboldt University that the event was a success, right? Okay, that's this. Then, before coming to Raquel, as said, it's a joint venture. The whole title of this event, also next week's event, is Seeing Like a State. For tomorrow we have a workshop going on. Some of you might have applied for that already. However, we have a few spaces still available, so if someone of you would be interested in participating in the workshop with Raquel and Claudio Sopranzetti, feel free to talk to either Gloria, Claudio, Stefania or me, and we can see how we can get you in, okay? So for all of you who do not know Raquel, it's a great pleasure to introduce her. Raquel is an architect and urban planner and full professor at the Faculty of Architecture and Urbanism at USP, at the University of Sao Paulo. She graduated in architecture and urbanism at the University of Sao Paulo, did her Masters of Architecture and Urban Planning also at the USP. Afterwards, graduated as a doctorate at the School of Arts and Science History Department, New York University. And finally, last year, she did her habilitation at USP also. Congratulations to that. Her research interests can be summarized to housing policies, urban policies, and public participation. She was furthermore special rapporteur for the UN Human Rights Council on the right to adequate housing for 2 terms in total from 2008 to 2014. She was the Director of Planning of the City of Sao Paulo between 1989 and 1992, Urban Planning Coordinator of the Polis Institute between 1997 and 2002, and National Secretary of Urban Programs of the Ministry of Cities between 2003 and 2007, among other professional and educational activities related to urban housing policies. She is the author of several books, next to others, The City and the Law, What is a City, and Foya Explains Sao Paulo. Her latest book, which was published this year, is called Urban Warfare, the Colonization of Land and Housing in the Financial Era. And the 3 of us who are organizing that, and me, we are really happy to give you the word and to hear more about your work. Thank you so much.
So first of all, I would like to thank you very much for the opportunity of being here. Especially thanks to Tale Bokland and to the group, to Stefania, to Sasha, to Gloria, and all of them that work hard to make possible this moment here. Also, I have to say that what I'm presenting here today is basically the content of my book, which was published in Portuguese and it's being translated into English, probably will be launched next year. But this was written as the product of my 6 years mandate as UN Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing. For those of you that might not be familiar with this mandate, the rapporteur is an independent expert that is nominated by the Human Rights Council in order to monitor the implementation of human rights, in my case in particular, human right to adequate housing. And in order to do that, the rapporteur basically does missions, which are study trips to specific countries, and presents a report on the situation of housing of that country afterwards to the Human Rights Council, but also picks up some topics related and present thematic reports on the Council, for instance, on post-disaster reconstruction and the right to housing, taking examples from different parts of the world. So this, I'm sorry, I have a horrible flu, so let's see if I get through the lecture. So basically, what I'm going to show here is the conclusion of my mandate. If I have to say what is the present situation of the right to adequate housing in the world, that's what I'm going to say. And by chance, and it was a chance, my mandate started in 2008, where the same year the financial crisis and the mortgage crisis started as well. And of course, there's a lot of things that I have to say about that. But the main issue, and here, being here in a university, of course, the mandate of the rapporteur is to monitor, to present, to speak out on the situation on behalf of those who have their rights violated. But as an academic, I use that material also in order to ask myself, what is the common trend between the everyday denunciations that I was receiving as a rapporteur, every day, of evictions with different faces. Could be foreclosures, losing one's home to the bank because of the non-payment of a mortgage. Could be a violent eviction of the so-called informal settlement in some part of the global south. But they are the same phenomenon. We are talking about a global phenomenon. We are talking about a global phenomenon which is absolutely the same and absolutely particular in each place, in each country, in each particular political economy in each housing is involved. And that's what I'm trying to show here. This global phenomenon that I'm referring to, I could define as a global insecurity of tenure crisis. What is the global insecurity of tenure crisis? Is the fragilization or elimination of the links between individuals, households, communities, and the territories and built spaces where they live, as their territories, and the built spaces where they live are being colonized, and I use this word on purpose. I'm talking about new phase of colonial imperialism, which is the colonization of the built space by finance under, yes, the era of financialized capitalism. So this is what I could define as the broad picture, and I focus the broad picture from a very particular point of view, which is housing. But this is just an entry point. You could see that in many, many other entry points as well. So, as I said, this global insecurity of tenure crisis has different phases. One of the phases are foreclosures, a phase that was very clear in the US, in Spain, in Ireland, not so clear, not so known in different countries. Or when I was doing a mission in Kazakhstan, and I went to Kazakhstan as a rapporteur with no idea about anything that was happening there in the field, specific field of housing. And then first day that I arrived there, I meet a hunger strike with a lot of people protesting against the housing crisis. And what was the housing crisis? In Kazakhstan, people were pushed, and pushed clearly by the government, to enter, to get credit to buy private apartments, private property apartments, financed by foreign investment, especially Deutsche Bank and other European banks, and built by Turkish construction companies. And when the financial crisis burst and started, this investment money went away from the construction company rapidly to shift to another new playground of yielding interest. The construction companies were bankrupt, and all the buildings that they have started to build were just left, and people just had no savings, because all the savings that they had put into the acquisition of the apartments. No savings, no money, so they were basically homeless. So the hunger strike was claiming state intervention to, in a way, address the situation. But you have seen those news also here when we talk about Spain, and also the fact that this crisis had at the same time activated new social movements around the right to housing, and especially, and that is what is striking about this story, is that the scenes, US, Spain, Kazakhstan, here an image of a camping in the most important street of Tel Aviv, people camping around the issue of housing in Israel. So this issue of housing was not, I would say, when I was in Israel and I was doing a mission in Israel, everybody was talking about West Bank, Palestine, Israeli settlements. But there was an internal crisis of housing for Israelis inside Israel. Because basically in all those countries, of course, with absolutely different levels, they lived a process where housing shifted from being a social policy, something, part of their welfare system, welfare state, something that the society agrees that through the state, in a way, through public money, should be provided to those who didn't have access to it in her because of their income. So basically, housing as a social, a public policy, a social good, pushing towards the one and only model, which is individual freehold of private property, apartments, and housing. The image here of United Kingdom and the protest against the bedroom tax, as what is called. The bedroom tax was just one of several measures of fiscal austerity measures that were taking out rights, the rights for the people to housing, especially low-income people. So what happened basically in those countries that yes, there were some housing problems, of course, in the US, in Spain, there were some housing problems in the 80s, in the 90s. But I would say that this was kind of residual. Because in the UK, for instance, 38% of the total households in the UK in the end of the 1960s was public housing. Publicly owned housing that the Britons and the working class, the British working class, could access through rent and through different schemes of renting and support for rent. And then what happened was all over, starting, yes, in UK and US, the originators of the model, but then spread out everywhere. The dismantling or fragilizing of all the policies that had this idea of housing as a social good, and reforming the state and reforming the system in order to promote the acquisition of houses through credit and through the banks. So what I'm talking here, in the case of UK, for instance, it was a massive privatization, and this also was exactly what happened with the former communist and socialist country, the massive privatization of social housing. And in the first years, this massive privatization accommodated beautifully everybody, because the ones that bought the houses were the ones that used to live there. So not only nobody was evicted from where they lived, but more than that, all of a sudden you are not a renter, but a landowner. And all of a sudden, as it was the case in Britain, you could use your house, like Noel Rubini said, as an ATM machine. So using your house in order to get more money from the bank and putting the house as collateral. Magic! I'm not only the owner of my own house, so I have total security of tenure, but also I can use it to finance my consumption, and that worked perfectly under Margaret Thatcher in many, many ways, in the political economy of Margaret Thatcher. By privatizing the whole public housing to the British working class, she just penetrated in the constituency of the Labour Party and break it very clearly. At the same time, that made possible also for the other reforms, because you could use your house to finance your health, your education, which was also privatized in a way in different sorts by the time, and including use your house in order to get more rent, eventually a second house, because, of course, the era of austerity was also an era of cuts in salaries and benefits for the working class. So I'm talking about the particular experience of UK, but this is not the only phase, this is not the only version of what happened to housing in the era of financialized capitalism, where rent extraction supersedes productive capital surplus value, and land and real estate in general, and housing in particular, was commodified completely, transformed into a commodity, but more than that, into a financial asset, and became one of the important outlets for expansion of finance, of globalized financial capital, which is this wall of money, which is seeking where it can go next in order to get more interest, to get more money, to get more interest, to get more money, to get more interest, to get more money. So it doesn't have anything to do with more investments in order to create more jobs or more good. No, no, no. It's money that gives money, that remunerates money, and that's the logic. And housing and real estate and the built space worked perfectly for this purpose. Because of course there is some characteristics in the built space that are very central to the financial circuit. The fact that is something material that can gain value, lose value, but never disappear, is there, is something important. Also, the importance, especially for pension funds, those actors in the financial circuit, is also something that can yield revenue over time, 15 years, 20 years, which is the exact logic of private pension funds, for instance. So it became, I would say, one of the preferred outlets for financial capital. So, of course, this has to be, when I'm talking about an outlet for financial capital, I'm talking about an idea that if there is somebody living in or not, it's not the more important thing. If it is useful for the city in a particular moment, if it responds to the necessities of the city in a particular moment, it's not important. The important is being there. It's being on the books. That's why we can understand how come you have surplus of built space, like in Mexico, thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of empty houses, and a lot of people lacking where to live. And the same thing we can see in many other places. So we are talking about a global phenomenon that has particular faces in different places. In the US, and this is the next thing, is that contrary to the myth of neoliberal policy, that one of the reasons why housing became a commodity that people themselves put their money instead of the state wasting their money on building there, and because of the necessity of fiscal cuts, the promotion of housing as commodities and as financials asset was actively promoted by the state and actively funded by public money. So in this graph on the US, we can see clearly, not so clearly maybe, what happened since the 70s, and then I'm talking about Reagan politics, Reagan and Thatcher, two very important starting point moments in this field, how federal expenditures on housing, how the money that used to go to housing and urban development departments to buy, to build housing projects, to be rent to the working class, and also to maintain them over time, which was a very important part of US policy. Of course, in US, the promotion of private property was always a very important part of the policy since the 30s of the last century. But there was a parallel policy as well of housing as a social good, with the construction of hundreds of thousands of public projects to be rented to North American working class, rented also and maintained with public money. So this money went down dramatically, and at the same time, the tax exemptions to buy private property was up. Tax exemption is public money, period. There is no difference. It's exactly the same thing. So what I'm talking about is that has nothing to do with fiscal cuts. It's to do with a deliberate choice of not putting money anymore on funding public housing, but putting money on funding private property and individual freehold. Why? Of course, now we have to enter with the meanings of private property. Yes, a little bit of theory. What is private property? Who invented this specific way of linking individuals with their territories? Now it's so hegemonic in terms of the link between individuals and territory that we almost forget that this was not like that, and this is not like that in all the places. So I'm talking about building the global hegemony of private property, which was a process. It was the revolution of the birth of capitalism. That was the revolution in the birth of capitalism in the 15th, the 16th, the 17th, the 18th century. And it encountered its political form in the 18th century through the creation of the liberal state, in each, for its theories, and maybe the US, the model of North American government is the most clear model of the interwoven links between property, markets, rights, freedom, and citizenship as one and only thing. So, adopted by liberal states in the 18th century and expanded over the planet, of course, absolutely connected with the marketization of the planet. But the difference is that now, under financial capital, as the materiality of the place is less important than the financial value that can circulate as an asset itself, and of course, for instance, under the form of securitization of mortgage. Securitization of mortgage is a financial title in itself that can circulate in itself absolutely freely and disconnect from the materiality of the house. Of course, now that converting it into an open field of capital transactions, but